Welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. This is a CD episode. This one I go through my Europe collection. Now, it's been over 3 years now I went through my Europe CD collection as it was post-2004, since they sort of came back together. This is all of them, and even in that time period that I covered, there are more releases that I have now that I didn't have then. So from their first album all the way to the most recent one that just came out late last year, this is my Europe CD collection on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Start off with the first Europe album, originally released in 1983, not released in North America until 1989. And that's why that's the copyright year on it. This isn't even the original album cover. The original album cover was just a band photo. They were a four-piece band at the time, much heavier. This is a Canadian edition. You can tell by looking at the side here. Canadian CBS CDs had a very unique look to them. They didn't strictly use the back cover as the US counterpart would have in most of the world. They kind of used this box format, which I never used to like. I kind of like it now because I think they're a little bit on the collectible side. So yeah, this album originally came out in '83, but it's got a copyright date of '89. And it's not one that you see all that often. A little customization on the disc itself. This is of course on Epic, which was their label at the time. Back cover, and very little in it for credits. That's the first one. Second one, which was their first, I think, international album, although I don't think it ever came out in Canada. I have yet to see a Canadian copy. One of my favorite Europe albums, Wings of Tomorrow. Great cover artwork. I've always loved the Europe logo too. Very classy looking. This is a US copy of Wings of Tomorrow. It's on Epic. And back cover's a little back into the 80s. Some of these classic albums have like sort of timeless artwork, and then you look at the back cover and it's like, oh yeah, this came out in the 80s. And I happen to love the 80s, so that's what the CD looks like. Typical CBS disc. And not much in it for credits. Same amount of credits that were in the cassette, which is what I had of this initially. But of course, we wouldn't be talking about Europe, chances are, if it weren't for their third album, The Final Countdown. And this is my copy. It's a US copy on Epic. Iconic album cover of the 80s. This, of course, their calling card single. Also contained Carrie and Rock the Night as far as hit singles go. There's your back cover. A newer CD. It doesn't say CBS, it says Sony Music Entertainment, so obviously makes sense. This one was issued and reissued a few times. This one has the lyrics, a band photo, and then all the lyrics, and a little bit of credits on that final page. Of course, it's been remastered, reissued a variety of times, but this is my copy of The Final Countdown. The follow-up came out in 1988, Out of This World. And this is a US copy, again, on Epic. Although I actually got this from Canadian Columbia House when they had a sale on CDs. I was replacing cassettes at the time, but this is the copy that came when I ordered it. It's the back cover. Great album, produced by Ron Nevison, with an identical production sound to that was on Kiss Crazy Nights. If you isolated the vocals, took the vocals off, the drums, guitars, all pretty much sound the same. Very smooth production. A little bit of credits. Not a lot of credits, just kind of a little bit more than there was inside The Final Countdown. Then, I think there was something of a costly wait after this album. It wasn't until 1991 that the fifth Europe album was released, and that's an eternity. 3 years was a long, long time back then. Of course, between 1988 and 1981, the music scene had changed dramatically. Grunge had taken over, and there were a few really, really good quality albums that came out of that tail end of what's called the hair metal era, although I've said many times I hate that term. And some of them just, at least in North America, the US and Canada, got totally ignored. And one of them was this album, Prisoners in Paradise. This came out in the fall of 1991, and it just sank. It disappeared. I bought the cassette when it first came out. About a year later, I found this CD, and I think it's a markdown because it has a hole marked in it. I didn't pay much for it. This is a great album. Probably their most, if there is such a thing, American-sounding album. It was produced by Beau Hill, so it doesn't sound unlike the second Winger album as far as the drum sound and overall feel. I like the font they used. All of the O's are stylized here. And with the exception of Seventh Sign, there's no in every one of the song titles, so it's kind of striking there. Picture the group there. And the lyrics. Lengthy credits inside this one. And Europe went on hiatus after that. This album did well for them in Europe and in other parts of the world, but they kind of disappeared from view for a long time, and some members did solo work. I know Joey Tempest released a few solo albums, the singer. In 1993, in most parts of the world, they put out a best of. Didn't come out in Canada until 1995. So this is Europe 1982-1992. This is a Canadian edition on Epic Sony. And this one was worth picking up because it had a single edit of Prisoners in Paradise, acoustic version of I'll Cry For You. It also had two previously unreleased songs, Sweet Love Child and Yesterday's News. And the eighth track on here is called Unbroken Wings, which didn't appear on an album, but it was the B-side of the Final Countdown single. That's what the disc looked like. Back cover of the booklet. Lengthy write-up in here. I'm thinking by Joey Tempest, basically talking about each of the songs. And that was it. That was it for a long, long time from Europe. So this came out in 95. Towards the end of the century, end of the decade, they reunited, got back together, and in advance of them starting to release new music, Sony, of course, probably wisely got in on it. At least Sony in the European territories released this 2-CD set called Rock the Night, the very best of Europe. And this is a good compilation. That last one I showed you was good. This one's better. This has even more. This has some B-sides, some remakes of previous songs, a couple live tracks. It's basically got what you'd be looking for by Europe and then some. And this is just full of great melodic rock, and in some cases, as I said before, their earlier stuff was quite a bit heavier. You might be surprised at just how heavy they were. So it's got one of these flip CD cases for the double, and long write-up about the history of the group, right on up to their reuniting. And of course, that set the stage for their post-80s and 90s albums, and they've been very prolific since then. And the first one of those is Start From the Dark, which came out in 2004. This is a Japanese version on JVC, which was their label in Japan, I think, for well, a lot of Western, say, rock bands ended up on JVC. They were probably on Sony in Japan, I would imagine. This is actually one that contains some extras. If you put your CD in the computer, it's got a little bit of a making of the album and a couple of live tracks in addition to the new songs here. And I gotta say, their new albums have all been pretty consistent. I'm liking this cover artwork. It's simple, but it's effective. And of course, they're still using their old logo. First looked at that, I wasn't sure what it was. Sort of tried, and then I realized it's the E in their logo. And like a lot of Japanese issues, this has some extras that come in it with some information in Japanese that, of course, I can only guess what it says based on the English part of it. All the lyrics of each of the songs, same lineup, I might add. The classic lineup was back together, and they've been back together ever since. Not a lot of lineup changes with Europe, especially compared to other bands of their era. And sort of picking up the trend from Prisoners in Paradise, these albums all did fairly well in Europe, more Europe, and not so much in North America, although they did get over here and play a few times. I've never actually seen them. So 2006 was the next Europe album. It's called Secret Society. A bizarre sort of Hypnosis-looking album art there. Hypnosis, the design company, not the state. If you'll notice down there, it says Europe, and inside of the O is the E in their logo. So my first thought when I looked at this is that they didn't use their logo, but they actually did. This is on T&T Records, which in this case was distributed by Sanctuary, which was a label that was around at the time. I think it had some Sony affiliations. I don't think that Sanctuary is around anymore, so if you were to buy a new copy of this, I'm not sure what label it would be on. That's what the disc itself looked like. And with these new albums, they started to rack up hit singles again. A song on here called Always the Pretenders was a European hit single for them. It's got all the lyrics to the songs here and some credits. And again, consistently good, and once again heavier than you might expect. They weren't back quite to their early 80s stuff, which was almost like Iron Maiden type of heavy, or early Queensryche, but heavier than the Final Countdown, Out of This World era. 2009, another good album, Last Look at Eden. Once again, this time around it's on EAR or Ear Music. This had some more hits on this. Great ballad on here called New Love in Town, which did fairly well for them. Went with a green sort of thing this time around. The album graphics are always kind of cool. And the lyrics. Usual band photos along with credits. Now, I still think that possibly my favorite of all of their post-reunion albums came out in 2012. I really like this one, Bag of Bones. Like the album cover. Again, this would look good on vinyl. I don't have the Europe vinyl I'd like to have. I have a few, but not all. And so this one, again, is on Hell and Back, which is, I don't know if it's their insignia, but it's once again distributed by EAR Music. This has some great songs on it. Not Supposed to Sing the Blues was a video from this album. I'd highly recommend checking that out for various starters. Yeah, some of this, reminds me a little bit of the credits inside of Kansas Point of No Return, and if that's what they were going for, I think that's just really, really cool. And there's your credits there too. So, a few more releases here to show you. In 2009, this is actually out of order, they put this out. It's called Almost Unplugged. So you can ascertain from that they did an Unplugged show, but there were some electric guitars. You would not be wrong in saying that. So on this one, it's a good mix of old and new. Some covers on here, most notably track 9, Since I've Been Loving You, the Led Zeppelin song. This came out on MVD Visual. Now, I've seen MVD Visual on releases before. I think I have a Winger DVD on that. They also do a song called Suicide, which is a Thin Lizzy song, Love to Love, which is a UFO song, two of their biggest influences and favorite bands. Next up, from 2013, this is Live at Sweden Rock. It's a 2-CD set, their 30th anniversary show. So they've been around for 30 years at this point. Joey Tempest still sounding great, singing the classic stuff on stage. Again, this is on MVD. This is an excellent collection of songs, old and new, 2-CD set. There's some special guests. I mentioned Thin Lizzy and UFO. It just makes sense. They've got Michael Schenker that comes up for a cover of UFO's Lights Out, and Scott Gorham from Thin Lizzy comes out and they do a great version of one of my favorite Thin Lizzy songs, Jailbreak. And 2 CD set. This one isn't in a flip case that way. It goes this way. It's recorded at the Sweden Rock Festival, which makes sense because they were one of the biggest rock bands to come out of Sweden, June 7th, 2013. And a great, great live collection of songs. I'm happy to say they're not one of those bands that have released a ton of live albums, like a live album after each studio album, but this one is definitely worth seeking out. So now we're going to get back into the studio work. Great album, came out in 2015, War of Kings. Great artwork again. This one is on UDR, and I'm not sure, if that's got any North American affiliation. It's not easy to find this stuff without ordering it, but it is possible. This time around, they used Dave Cobb as a producer, and he's best known for working with Rival Sun, so it's a very dry sound, and it works so well for this album. Heavy. It's they're keeping it heavy. So there's band photos and lyrics in here, and the credits. And the most recent Europe album came out at the tail end of last year. I was happy to get it. I did a review episode earlier this year, back in January, for Walk the Earth, the latest Europe album, again on UDR Recordings. And I'm happy to say all of these Europe albums, the copies that I've got anyway, have been on your standard jewel cases, not the digipacks. These last much, much better. Got this one on vinyl as well. And another great album. They've just kind of been on a roll, even though this one it's a little darker than some of their previous albums, but still really, really good. And once again, produced by Dave Cobb. So in the review episode, I go into quite a bit of detail about this one. Good stuff. If you sort of lost track of them at the end of the 80s, I would recommend picking up any of these reunion albums. So thanks for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions, going through my Europe CDs.